Deceit and Self-Deception in Kingston, Jamaica. Who would have imagined it? This better be juicy. What is deceit and self-deception? Deceit is lying to others, and that can be nonverbal, it can be verbal, it can be gestural, and self-deception is lying to yourself. You can deny something that's true about yourself, project it onto someone else, and then attack it in the other person. We'll end with such an example. Now, there are two main ways in which, well, the function of self-deception is given in the subtitle here. I believe, and I've amassed a lot of evidence that support the notion, that the primary reason we fool ourselves is the better to fool others. And there are two cases in point. If I'm lying to you now about something you actually care about, and you're close enough, and better yet, you know me, you can watch my eye movements. You can listen to the pitch of my voice, especially if it goes up. You can watch for unusual pauses and so on. But if I've lied to myself, if I'm unconscious that I'm practicing deception, my words will be surrounded with the sincerity that is associated with honesty. You'll lack those cues for spotting my deception. The second is that we're in the business of promoting ourselves as being more benefactive than we really are. We help people more than we do. We're more beneficial. We're better looking. We're smarter, and so on. So in that case, we can fool people into having a higher image of ourselves than the facts warrant. It often shows up in people putting themselves in the upper half of a category. So 80% of high school students in the US say they're in the top half for leadership ability. It's not possible. But for self-deception, you cannot beat academia. In the United States, fully 94% of professors regard themselves as being in the top half of their profession. And I plead guilty. I can be tied down to a bed in a back ward of UWI hospital, and I still think I'm doing better than half my colleagues. And that's not just a comment on my colleagues. But this is just our mouth. This is just the way we flab our mouth. Do we really, 70% of us will say we're in the top half for good looks. Do we really think so, or are we just flabbing our mouth? The next experiment I think you'll enjoy because it demonstrates very clearly that something deeper is going on. It's not just flabbing our mouth. And this is whether we think we're better looking than we really are. And these are the authors, Epley and Whitchurch. Woman, they've stripped her of her hair, and what they've done then is, with the help of a computer, they morph her with more and more percentage of a good-looking face, which is the average of 15 good-looking women picked out of a sample of 60. Okay? So here is the Whitchurch. Here's 20% better looking. Here's half and half, 50%. Or they morph you with someone who's got craniofacial syndrome, which makes you uglier. Now, they do the same thing with Epley, only he's not too good looking to start with. So you have to kind of shift it. But anyway, he's getting better looking here and even uglier in this direction. Now, here's the game they play, and they play it with you. So you've got to imagine that it's your face, and they do it, and they've morphed it. Now, you're sitting in front of a computer screen, blingo. Suddenly there are 12 photos in front of you, matched for your age and sex, and one of them is you. And all you've got to do is, as soon as you spot it, hit that button and then point to it. That controls for people making mistakes, okay? But here's the catch. In a number of the runs, and they repeat it, of course, the picture of you is real you. In a number of the runs, it's 20% better looking you, and in a number of runs, it's 20% uglier you. So which do you see first? Well, you see better looking you first. It takes 5% longer time for you to spot the real you, and 5% longer still to spot the ugly you, okay? So in your mind's eye, you're 20% better looking. If they give you all those pictures at one time that we saw there and ask you which one you like most, it's 20% better looking. And this is an important feature of deceit and self-deception. You don't exaggerate your looks by 30%, it's implausible. You don't exaggerate your looks by 10% because you're giving away some of the benefit. So it's bounded at 20%. Now, I don't need a social psychologist to tell me about this effect because if I'm in a big city, I see it nearly every week. I'll be walking down the street like this, talking to a young and attractive woman, not up to nothing, you understand, just wanting her to like me enough to allow me to stay nearby, right? And while I'm walking along, I spot on the other side of her an old man, white hair, ugly, face falling apart, and he's not even really walking, he's more like shambling, you know? And then, of course, I realize that's me reflected in the store windows. So self-deceived me sees real me as ugly me. All right. Now, we use verbiage also to alter reality one unto the other. So, for example, one simple trick is simply whether you make the voice active or passive, okay? So if I'm doing well, then I say, I did this, I did that, and benefits rain down on all of you. But if I do poorly, I take a passive voice, and I'm a victim of circumstances. And this was perhaps best captured by a man who ran into a telephone pole in San Francisco about 20 years ago. And as recorded by the police, his description was as follows. The pole was approaching my car when I attempted to swerve out of the way, and it struck me. All right. Perfectly legitimate, but it shifted the responsibility to the telephone pole. Now, we know about the importance of words here in Jamaica, Ija Rastafari, for example. The Rasta movement began in the 30s, and it was a movement of self-pride and self-assertion by the dispossessed, by the underclass, and by those that were most African in appearance. So none of this me I go shop, I man. Even we sounded too weak because it reminded them of me, so it's I and I. So a Rastaman in full spirit might say something like this. I man and I, brethren, smoke, I tell, I shins, I continually. All right? And you feel good when you talk like that. So my son is on the internet looking for Rasta sites, and he comes across a Rasta man who's slowly going around the bend, getting angrier and angrier and angry. What is he mad about? The wholesale expropriation of Jamaican culture by the larger culture with no acknowledgement, no thanks, certainly no penny on the dollar. Terms like this vexed his spirit. iPod. Oh, what up? iPhone. What? iPad. IT redut. Is IT redut? Okay, there are other uses that are amusing. There is something called the euphemism treadmill, in which we invent a euphemism for something, but then it comes to connote the old thing, so we have to have a new euphemism. So toilet is too much like what a toilet is. So now it becomes a bathroom. So you're bathing in there. But that's a little bit too personal. So it becomes a restroom. So you're taking a nap in there. I called the operator at Rutgers University to get someone's number, and some young man answered the phone and said, information assistant. You know, I thought I'd dialed the wrong number at first. He's gotten a verbal raise there. Okay. Now, let me give you another example from social psychology where we've gotten past mere words. There are two ways you can write E on your forehead, and what they do is they make the person 5 times and write E, because they don't want them thinking about it, they want them concentrating on the 5 and then just write E. So you can write a other focused E, where I write it like this so you can read it, or you can write a self-focused E. I write it like so, and I can see through it, and that's an E. Now, most people, in fact, write an other focused E, but what is interesting is that it depends upon the degree of power they feel, and there are these little tricks where you can induce a feeling of power, which is temporary, but long enough to produce these effects. Or you can produce the feeling of low power. So someone with low power, about 12% of the time, they do an other focus, self-focused E, all the rest is other focus. But if you're high power, you're 3 times as likely to be self-focused. There's a series of other correlates that go with this inducement of a feeling of power. You recognize facial expressions less well. You remember faces less well. You have a harder time taking the viewpoint of someone else in a simulated situation. So power itself is inducing a kind of ignorance and blindness of those underneath you. Those underneath have got to pay attention to those variables. Now it's worse if it's a man, because we know that men in various domains are more overconfident than women are overconfident. There's a tendency for all of us to be overconfident, but it's more a male disease. So a powerful man is both ignorant and overconfident. That's a bad combination. And it reminds me of the fact that self-deception often ends badly. It gives you some benefits at the beginning, you fool others, you float along, but it ends badly. Think Bruce and Dudas. Now, how soon does this start? We know that it starts very early in life, deception. By 6 months of age, children are already crying out of context. Now, this guy's about a year old, but he's really got his act down well, so let's watch him a bit. Suffering, agony. Now his audience disappears. Now, trust me, that boy would keep that up all afternoon, but this is a TEDx talk. Time is limited, right? Now, here's a little boy I love who's about a year of age, and this shows you how the child can quickly learn to use a facial expression in a novel context. You'll hear the father in the background saying, "Give him the evil eyes, son. Give him the evil look." Good. Now notice, you saw the fake one first and the real one second. Now we'll just run through the real a second time. It's the same thing. But the first one is in response to his father. Give me the look. Now you're going to see the real expression, which is like, what the hell is going on over there? I love that little boy. All right. But in actual fact, the deception begins earlier still. The child is lying to his mother in the last 3 months of pregnancy. The child takes over control of the mother's blood sugar level, raising it, raises mother's blood pressure, redistributes the blood around it, takes it away from feet and hands. It does this by producing hormones that are either identical to or close chemical mimics of the hormones the mother uses to control those variables at all other times. But here's the catch. It produces these hormones at 1,000 times the concentration that the mother does. We believe this is because of a coevolutionary struggle where initially it started pouring in some extra hormones, and then the mother became inert to them. And the offspring had to add some. And the mother again became deaf, because it's not to her advantage to give the offspring as much as the offspring wants. She has other children she has to parcel her resources to, past and present. Past, present, and future, I should say. So we believe that has escalated it. So in effect, the child is saying, "Mama, me hungry." And she says, "Me can't hear you good." "Me hungry." "You say you're hungry?" But it's hormones and hormone receptors that are carrying the argument. Okay, now here's an extremely important finding, and it's general. It doesn't just apply to children. The smarter your child is, the more they lie. Okay? I will give you the experiment in a second, but if your child is a real bright child, this is 4 years old, it's a little cognitive test, a little mental test, they lie 100% of the time. If you have a slow child, 65% of the time. Now what's the experiment? The child's sitting here, there's a box behind the child, someone puts something in the box, closes it, and says, I'm leaving the room for a couple of minutes, do not peek. Do not peek. Well, they watch, most children peek. Then they come in and they say, did you peek? And most children lie, about 80% of them. But the key is that they lie more the smarter they are. All right? Similar effect in monkeys, okay? This is size of the neocortex, this social part of the brain. But you could just use brain size itself if you wanted. And what you see is the bigger the neocortex, the more often they act deceptively in nature. This is very carefully controlled data. I won't bother you with those details. But the take-home message is this. Intelligent people are more likely to lie, and they're more likely by logic to practice self-deception. We might easily imagine and wish it were otherwise, but I don't believe it is. And it means a bright person may have things to give because of his or her brightness, but is their self-deception warping it around in the wrong direction and so on? Okay. Now, I always believe in ending with a little bit of self-criticism. And after all, if I have a theory of self-deception that applies to your self-deception and yours but doesn't apply to mine, there's some deficiency here. There's some bias here. So I like to end with self-criticism. Now, in the U.S., I almost always end with self-deception and war because we, U.S., are always at war. And self-deception makes an unusually strong contribution, especially to disastrous wars. Now, what am I going to talk about in Jamaica? There are society-level phenomena of corruption and this, that, and the 48 thing, but I don't know much about it. I want to talk about something down at my level. So here's the paradox or the contradiction. We have an island that is chock-a-block full. I tell you, chock-a-block full with beautiful women. Period. At the same time, we have a whole heap of hyper-heterosexual men who go berserk at the thought that two men are giving each other sexual pleasure. What the Rasta George is going on here? Okay? Well, let's add a little bit of science. They ran some amusing experiments in Georgia where they took A1 heterosexual men. What's an A1 heterosexual man? That's someone who has never had a homosexual experience, nor a homosexual thought or fantasy, or so he says. Now you give him a homophobia scale. How angry or upset or rotted do they get over male homosexuality? And you divide them into those that are relaxed and those that are hyper upset. And now comes the fun part, is you show them dirty movies, but you first tie a plethysmograph to the base of each man's wood, and the plethysmograph, the plethysmograph allows precise measures of changes in diameter, okay? So we start off watching 6 minutes of a man and a woman making love, okay? Pornographic film. The wood grows admirably throughout the entire video. There's no difference between the two groups, so I won't tell you which is which. Now you watch two women making love, and the wood starts admirably, but then it starts sloping off, and it doesn't quite reach up to a man and a woman. Again, these are statistically indistinguishable. Now you're probably guessing what's down here. This is two men getting it on. These are non-homophobic men, men that are not upset. And they show a slight and insignificant increase in wood size. Here are the homophobic men. Wood, larger. It's taking off here. It's getting bigger still. or it's ending up somewhere around here, you know? Now, we know this in the U.S., this is a monthly occurrence, you know, that those who are most hostile towards homosexuals get outed every month, a preacher or a politician, for their secret homosexual life. Now, we don't know if the laws of psychology that apply in Georgia also apply in Jamaica, but as a first approximation, we have to assume so. So that says there's a suppressed and repressed homosexuality problem on this island, and it comes out in violence. Now, where it comes from, you have to ask someone else. I've spoken to people like Brian Chang, Kay Osborne, people that have a lot of insight into Jamaican society, and they talk about father-absent families and the behavior of the mother when she doesn't have a father to lay down the law and so on. I have nothing to say about it. I just pose it as a classic problem of denial, projection, and then attack. So deceit and self-deception is something that applies to all of us at every phase of our life, from our most intimate relations to our national behavior, even to how we talk to ourselves. And it's something we can all participate in because the logic is simple and the behavior is universal. I thank you.